Welcome to the Everything is a Primary Source podcast, the show where popular culture is used to learn about the past. Today, we're headed to the public library where, after 1994, you could borrow a copy of both Forrest Gump the novel and Forrest Gump the movie. Plenty of people, including my first guest, did not realize that the 1994 Robert Zemeckis film began life as a book by celebrated writer Winston Groom, published in 1986. That's a tendency credited to the positive critical and popular response the Tom Hanks movie received. In fact, if the book was translated to film verbatim, there's a good chance it would be considered one of the wackiest movies ever made, instead of the sweeping baby boomer epic that we got. All right, so we're at Prescott Park, and Little Shop of Horrors is going to get started, and you have a role in Little Shop production, right?
Yeah, I'm the assistant stage manager.
Awesome. So Sidge is here, and we have a few minutes to talk about, you selected one of my favorite, the reason why it's all crumpled up and beaten up like that is because that's one of my favorite books. I've read it probably 10 times in my life. It's Forrest Gump.
I never realized that there was a novel version of Forrest Gump.
A lot of people, I only knew it because my brother had checked out the book. It was after the movie came out, but he checked out the original book from 1986, and it has like a totally different cover art on it than the Tom Hanks one. And I read the first page and I was hooked. I'm like, this is just brilliant. So I guess the question I'm going to ask you is about that particular copy, which has the Tom Hanks on it. And the sequel's right next to it, Gump and Company, which that's an even more intriguing one because written by the same author, but that was produced after the movie. So as you read the book, Gump and Company, it's like a weird hybrid between the two media forms. So it's like the same characters from the book, but definitely a lot more of the movie bleeds into it, and it's kind of weird. And not as good of a book for that reason.
Yeah.
But why do you think that they made the cover for, same font as the movie poster and all that?
Well, I think it's the most recognizable thing. They do it with a lot of books, like YA books that get turned into movies now. Like, if you look at, I don't know, the first one that I think of is, I think it's Divergent.
Yes.
They used to have, these really nice covers, and then now they're just, stills from the movie.
And I think they even borrowed on that, they probably do that. I would love to do, a Instagram or some kind of thing with book covers and how, so the same title but different iterations of the book covers. I think you'd see a lot of cool stuff with that. And one thing I recognize with Divergent is after the Hunger Games books took off and those movies got real popular and they made the Divergent movies, the covers of those books started looking remarkably like Hunger Games because they were kind of hoping that
some confused teenager would pick it up and be like, it's
part
probably
of the same series.
Same.
Yeah, I'll do this. And it's not, so it's like, but yeah, I guess, dystopian YA story, they're all kind of The Giver, same thing. All those movies came out 2014 also. It's like boom, 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 one after the other. Ender's Game, Maze Runner. Similar thing going on here, I think. So the movie was getting a lot of fanfare when it came out. It was, Tom Hanks. He's golden. He won an Oscar for this. But by putting it on the cover of the book, do you think they were trying to get the movie audience to buy in, or were they telling the book audience, hey, if you don't want to watch the movie, here's the book version?
Well, this comes from a less educated position. But my understanding is that the movie was more popular than the novel was. So I think that they're probably trying to appeal to people who saw the movie and then see the book at the bookstore and go, oh, I watched that movie. I know that guy. I'll read that book.
I think that's probably it. Yeah. I that's a good... And so that tells us something about readership in the 90s versus movie-going ship. I think there's plenty of people that do both.
Yeah.
I like movies just as much of a book as a book, but there's something about books that I think everybody who reads anything, I'm not an avid reader, but I love it's on my own time. I'm like, okay, I'll go. And then if a book's good enough, I can't wait to get back to it. I'm like, oh, I can't wait till tonight when I can go back to my book and see where they picked off. But it's like you take a bit of ownership in creating what the characters look like in your mind, and that's one thing it kind of hurts this book, is that it puts the character right on the cover, and then for the rest of the reading, it's like all you can see is Tom Hanks.
That's how I feel about a lot of the YA books that put the main characters on the cover with the movie version, because I think that one of the big appeals of YA fiction is that it allows teenagers to see themselves in a book character, and by putting that character on the front, it really determines what that character looks like in that person's mind.
They kind of did that with Harry Potter.
Yeah.
When they started making the movies before the book series were actually done. Because then it's like, well, from now on, you have to see Daniel Radcliffe. You have no choice in the matter at all. You can't invent your own version of the character at all. I mean, I know there was illustrations in some of those books, small ones, but they didn't create the world the same way as the movies did. And so it's like, I kind of, and you can see that with the sequel for Forrest Gump Company. It's like, it takes more of the movie, and I'm glad they never made a sequel, because it would have been, because it's like the original Forrest Gump is just weird. Like there's he befriends a orangutan, he gets blasted into outer space, he is a chess champion. I
think that one might be in the movie.
The chess part?
No, it's ping pong.
Yeah, so he does that in the book too. So like everything that's in the movie is also in the book, but then there's a lot more, and it's a lot weirder and crazy, and it's a funny book. It's like it's meant to be like predominantly a comedy, whereas the movie is a lot more heartfelt and touching and stuff like that. So it's like, in some ways, it may have also been as a way to kind of give the movie extra credibility for people. Be like, oh, I didn't know it was like that same reaction. Yeah, I didn't know this was a book. Okay, maybe I'll go see that movie because it's based on something a little bit more. I found out recently two things kind of cool before we end this, is that first is the Vietnam scenes in the movie were filmed across the street from where his childhood home in Alabama was filmed.
Wow.
Like in the same, I think it was somewhere in South Carolina, they filmed both sequences because there's like perfect locations for both. And the second one is that the movie produced the character of Lieutenant Dan, who loses his legs, became a symbol for disabled veterans. And Gary Sinise has, since Forrest Gump, the guy who played Lieutenant Dan, has since become a vocal advocate for disabled veterans and entertains them. He has a Lieutenant Dan band. One of my favorite documentaries is about the Bonus Army March. It was narrated by him, and it's like because a lot of them wrote to him and saying how they feel he depicts that character so well, so relatable and understandable, and a lot of people don't understand what it's like to be a war veteran who's lost limbs or has otherwise been hurt. So I think Winston Groom was a Vietnam vet himself, so that's why he writes so well about the experience. And I think he passed away a few years ago, so I think he would be very happy to know that his book, even if the movie didn't translate exactly, still does a lot of good.
Well, and now I have two books that I'm very excited to read.
You need to read them, definitely. Forrest Gump and Gump and Company. Thanks for stopping by.
Thank you.
Have a great show.
You too.
Everything is a Primary Source is building a digital archive, and you can get involved. Perhaps you would like to add to this conversation or start a new one about history through pop culture. Go to everything-history.com to learn about the Everything is a Primary Source project and how you can take part in this exciting new educational resource. I was so happy to collect a conversation about Forrest Gump last summer in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. It certainly provided great perspectives and new ideas. But who better to discuss a story which is very specific to Alabama society and culture than a trio of teachers from Alabama?
Well, I think it's. I drank 16 Dr. Peppers. The Watergate.
All right. I am so glad to have Marcy, Melissa, and Helen. I thought your name would start with M too. That'd be perfect for Alabama with the M. That doesn't make any sense. Okay, so I'm happy to have you here at the Nashville. Did you drive from Alabama to get to Nashville?
Yes, we drove.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what you need to do on your drive back is listen to the Everything is a Primary Source podcast. This episode won't be on there that soon, but it will be not long after, because we're going to talk about a movie, Forrest Gump, which it's my favorite. It's one of my favorite books of all time. I love the book. Have you read the book before?
I have not. I've
No.
seen the movie.
It's
There's a lot of stuff that wasn't included.
right, because apparently, and so the question we're going to talk about is how is this made, and the way that movies, of course, are made. They start with a screenplay. Winston Groom, who wrote the book, and you said he's a local. You knew each had contact with him in some way when he was alive. He wrote the original screenplay, but they were like, we can't make a movie like this.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, what are some of the features of the book that you're like, yeah, they wouldn't have been able to?
It's been a long time since I read the book, but if I'm not mistaken, wasn't Forrest Gump also an astronaut?
He was an
And went out
astronaut.
into
Yeah,
space?
that's the part that I remember more than anything that stood out. And there was something about a chimp, was
Yeah,
there
a
not?
orangutan named Sue.
Yeah.
And he
Yeah.
was a chess champion, which that's not weird, but he also was a wrestler called the Dunce. And it was like if they had made that verbatim from the book, it would have been the weirdest movie. I would have loved it, but it would not have been what the status this movie has become. And ultimately, in order to be it's like a symphony almost of the life of a baby boomer. You know, he was born after World War II, we assume, because he's a kid in the 50s and, grows up in the 60s and everything like that. In order to make it look legit, to go and place him into a very convincing different eras, what did they have to do? What did Robert Zemeckis have to do? What kind of tools, because we were talking about that, did they have to use?
I mean, a lot of the background, the dress had to be authentic to the time period so that you could recognize the time frame or, put the things together with the event. So, I mean, there was a lot of time spent, I think, on the authenticity of the props and background and that kind of stuff.
And even just the technology that's used to place Tom Hanks in the White House, standing at the schoolhouse door, and all those other events. That was like cutting edge back in the early 90s.
And it still stands up. Like, if you watch it now, it still holds up. It's very much, and I mean, when we look in that time period, early 1990s, the first half of the 90s, the previous years when Jurassic Park had come out, and that was revolutionary with CGI, using computers as well as practical effects to make it look real. This is almost entirely computer effects to put Tom Hanks into black and white. I mean, I'm sure they helped that they're like, oh, thank goodness this is black and white because it's easier to mask, the different issues you might have. But to put him with these very famous people, presidents, that was cutting edge. Why do you think, or what does that tell you about the 90s as far as in our society and our culture then, and maybe even our economics then, that there was that much of so deliberate to make it so accurate that they didn't just rely on, because they could have done all this stuff with actors that kind of looked like JFK.
Yeah.
They could have done that without any of the actual footage. Why was that such an important component to the movie by the 1990s?
I'll jump in if you don't mind. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we were getting into that digital age, leaving the analog age into the digital age, and people were becoming more apt to want to see that perfection. But also, too, the fact that people were more familiar with what these individuals looked like. The age of television allowed for the world to open up and actually see who these individuals are. If somebody's like, that's not President Kennedy, doesn't look anything close, they're not going to buy into it.
Right.
So I think that made a big difference. People being more familiar with who these people were, what they sounded like. I think that was an important part of it.
I remember watching the movie and yes, it is a regional based. It does have a lot to do with Alabama. They make up a place, Greenbow, Alabama, right? It's the book takes place in Mobile, but it's like they have that connection. He keeps going back there as his home base throughout the story. In the movie more than the book, but he keeps going back there, but it's still a collective story for people of his generation. And so I remember watching it with my parents as almost like and they didn't say it this way, but they put it up there as like, this is our story. You know, they were born in the 40s. They grew up in that same time period. And if they're going to have younger people, like you said, buying into it, you can't just go with some guy that sort of looks like, or you can't just make an entire news shot from scratch. It makes it so much more authentic and realistic looking if you take the actual news footage and then put old Forrest in there, you know, peeking in and you know, all that kind of stuff. Other components of it, you mentioned about the music. The music, I mean, another movie that I was actually just watched this on the plane ride for like the hundreds of times. My favorite movie of all time is American Graffiti.
Oh, absolutely.
That turned 50 this year. Music is one of the characters in that movie, really. It's one of the players. Forrest Gump as well. So do you think that there was a lot of... How do you think they must have gone about curating the soundtrack for Forrest Gump? What do you think was the... I mean, that's a big responsibility to say this song, not that song.
Yeah.
Well, I think they would have had to look at the popularity of songs for the sense that music can take you back to those times. So you're talking about it being kind of a baby boomer film. For people who had experienced those time frames, hearing some of those songs that were more popular would have made the time feel, you know, like your memory is, you know, you remember it, you feel it.
You know.
And so I think that they probably took a lot of time to really, you know, look at what songs represented what was going on, but also would connect to the audience for them to have that experience and, you know, remembrance of past experiences.
I think they're hitting all the genres because Rebel Rouser's in there, and that's kind of like a rockabilly, and then you've got Hound Dog from Elvis, and then you start getting into the Doors when you head toward the 70s.
Yeah, when he gets in Vietnam.
Bob Dylan. Getting into the folk music of that time period.
Joan Baez.
They do so, and a lot of that music, the way they use it in the movie sets the scene. They don't even need to explain so much. Not only is it a character, it's almost part of the setting. Right, where it's
actually the Vietnam shot is CCR's Fortunate Son.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which I want to get back to music, but I watched a whole documentary about how they made Forrest Gump.
The movies that made us.
Yes, isn't that a great documentary?
Yes.
I didn't realize that the Vietnam scenes were filmed across the street from his mother's house. That was like, it was in South Carolina that they filmed it, and they were like, well, we have the trees that look like the jungle in Vietnam, dirt roads. They made Vietnam right in South Carolina, right next to where they're filming. And it's like, it's remarkable because you're like, wow, that's like on the cheap. That's not something a budget of millions of dollars would do that. But that just shows you the eye for maybe like, hey, we can tell this story without having to actually fly out to a jungle or actually go to Vietnam. But back to the music, you know, we communicate still, and I think it's effective because of how important pop music is, really starting with the 40s and the 50s, rock and roll age, absolutely. Here we are in Music City. We communicate with songs. I use Instagram a lot, and I can throw a song with a picture. I watch these commercials nowadays, and like Airbnb does it, and Verbo, and all. You know, they will communicate. They'll put one song on, and just show you a bunch of pictures. Yeah. And they don't have a narration. They don't have anything else. It's just that we communicate that way. I think about that with Forrest Gump, like the scene where he goes to see Jenny when she's performing at the Gentleman's Club, and they play Tommy James and the Shondells, Hanky Panky. As soon as the scene starts, you're like, I know what we're getting into here, you know? I mean, he kind of alluded to it by looking at her in Playboy before that, but it was like, okay, you know, it sets the scene. And then when, you know, they play CCR as they're bearing down on landing in Vietnam, you can just feel the tension. It's like, and that song is about Vietnam, and so it's like, they picked it so well. Is there any other components of Forrest Gump under the how it was made that you think, had they not done it, it would not have been the same movie?
Maybe the storytelling aspect, while he's sitting on the bench waiting to go see Jenny. Yeah. And it's all the different people.
It's flashbacky.
Yeah. I guess, and he's just telling his story.
Yeah.
and everybody's like amazed.
I always get super confused, though. It doesn't matter how many times I watch that movie, from the moment he realizes and the woman tells him that, where he's going is just a few blocks away, that we end with the flashback, and now everything. I keep waiting. 'Cause there's still like another half hour of the movie left after that. I keep waiting for him to like go back at the bench. I'm like, oh wait, no, we're done with that part. That was like the first, 2 acts of the movie was bench telling a story, and now we're beyond it. It is a very effective thing. Nothing in the book hints at that, except for I remember the cover art. My brother borrowed the book from the library. I think it was after the movie came out, so that's why he recognized the title. But the cover art from like 1986, you see like a man that you assume is Forrest Gump on a bench with his arm up on the, just kind of watching the world go by kind of thing. And so I wonder if that factored into the screenwriting and the direction of like, yeah, we're going to use that as, well, this is kind of what I do of like talking to people, like every single person in this room, your history, everybody's history is unique, and we all have stories, and it's these kinds of touchstones. And Forrest Gump, the movie, really demonstrated that if you have, we all, pop culture drives that, activates memory, and we all see it, and it means something to us a little bit differently sometimes, but it all still is part of our story.
Well, think about the effect that it had on pop culture after the fact. Everybody knows life is like, well, okay, I always mix it up. Life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get, or however.
And run, Forrest, run.
Run, Forrest, run. I still say that to kids as we're going to the carpool. I'm like, run, Forrest.
I do too. I mean, it is something that's almost ingrained, and it comes up periodically.
Well, and that's another part of how it's made. I forget the young man's name, but the boy who played young Forrest, that's his actual voice.
Yes.
And Tom Hanks took
he emulated
cues from
voice.
him.
Yeah.
He's like, I want to make sure, because he's a young kid. You couldn't really ask him to do another voice, and he's local. He's from and so if he's going to do the accent much better than Tom Hanks could. So it's like, without that boy, we wouldn't have been able to. And one of the most touching things about that documentary that we both watched, how it was made, is the last component of it that we talked about Gary Sinise and his portrayal of Lieutenant Dan, that without those special effects, it would not have been convincing of him being a paraplegic.
Yeah.
And when that movie was released, 1994, this is after the Gulf War, and of course Vietnam was before that, and he got an outpouring of disabled veterans reaching out to him saying, you portrayed us so perfectly, and you gave us agency, basically. Like, we wouldn't have had a voice without Lieutenant Dan.
And we wouldn't have the Lieutenant Dan band.
Exactly.
And raising money for disabled
because
veterans.
He's then gotten so involved in that community and done a lot for
with the DAV, and it's like,
and he may, I don't know his background. I don't know if that would have happened anyway.
Right.
But I mean, he surely has really become a picture for a lot of vets and helping to get them resources and things.
I have a feeling, I have never met Gary Sinise. I'd like to. He seems like a great guy, but I have a feeling that that's the kind of guy he is, that something like that, he's not, like a star, like, I don't answer fan mail. He probably would have found something to do with his status that was good, but this is like the ultimate good, is to give the picture a portrayal. One of my favorite documentaries I show in my class, and it's a nice length, it's like 30 minutes long, but it's very, covers it all, is from PBS. It's about the Bonus Army March of the Bonus Army.
Yeah.
And that was sponsored by the DAV, narrated by Gary Sinise. And I always point that out to my students when we're watching it, and we're filling out these forms, because I said, and I tell them that story. I say, this is Gary Sinise. He played Lieutenant Dan in Forrest Gump, and I always ask, how many of you have seen the movie? And sadly, the numbers are getting lower. There's very few kids that still watch that, and I think that's a shame, because it's like one of the best sweeping epic films that you really, it sums up not only the entire time period, but the 90s too. I mean, it's part of that. But I always point that out to them. I said, this is why he does this, is because of his, and without those special effects, I don't think they would have had the same. I mean, he's a great actor, but I don't think he could have done it quite the same way.
Not with it looking as authentic as it
Right.
did. I mean, they did a wonderful job with the CGI on that.
So I guess by the 90s, what it tells us is that audiences were demanding more and more, better and better from the movie industry. We weren't satisfied with, and thanks to all those big blockbuster action movies of the 80s, just pushing the boundaries of, because special effects used to be reserved just to action movies and science fiction stuff.
Yeah.
And now you're applying it to a drama.
Yeah.
That's really remarkable, and it's very much a symbol of the time period. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me about this, and I know there's lots of big speakers coming up, and it would be bad of me if I kept you here from them. But are you going to see Marty Stewart?
I already saw Marty
he already
Stewart.
did it.
It was amazing.
Is Carl Zeus coming up soon?
Carl Zeus is coming.
3:40, yeah.
Oh, okay. I wish I could break away for that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The Everything is a Primary Source project is a collaborative, open-source digital archive of oral history based on reactions and relationships to popular culture. Each entry into the archive begins with a conversation recorded during one of our Your History Through Pop Culture exhibits, also known as podcast karaoke. These are held at a variety of different venues and can be booked for your school, library, museum, or business to be carried out in person or virtually. The next step is to post the primary source in its appropriate category at everything-history.com and supplement it with a short essay contextualizing the book, movie, album, show, toy, game, gadget, or whatever else might be the subject. This will usually be done by us, but these essays could be your way of collaborating. Each recording typically covers just one or two of the 9 critical thinking questions that are asked in order to decide what an artifact tells us about time and place. This leaves room for teachers and their students from all over to contribute by recording their own thoughts on the subject until all of the questions are answered. You can even take part without typing or talking. Each entry will have a space for you to include your pictures of related primary sources that help make the time period and place in question clearer. Teachers and their classes are able to use the archives as reliable secondary sources while the entries are under construction, and absolutely when they're completed. While some topics might be reserved for older students, the Everything is a Primary Source project will always have something for everyone. The Everything is a Primary Source project promotes history, media, and digital literacies, cultural appreciation, and collaboration between people of different ages, geography, and backgrounds. Ultimately, it demonstrates how fun it is to learn about history through pop culture. Start your collaborative journey today at everything-history.com.